In today's episode, let's talk about the most prolific serial killer in American history, known as the Green River Killer. He terrorized Washington state from 1982 to 1998, leaving a trail of terror and devastation behind him. The sheer brutality of his actions is enough to send chills down anyone's spine. It's the case of Gary Ridgway, right now on Love and Murder. Welcome, everyone. Welcome to a new episode of Love and Murder, the weekly true crime podcast discussing relationships gone terribly wrong, where our motto is, you're either someone's last love or their first murder. I am your host, Kai, and our show discusses true crime cases told in the form of a story with mystery and suspense. Be sure to subscribe to Love and Murder on Spotify, Apple, or whatever platform you're on so you don't miss a case. Yeah, I caught myself saying Spotify. Sorry, I'm not from Boston. In today's episode, we're talking about serial killer Gary Ridgway. Gary had a weird fascination with his own crimes. I mean, I guess as any serial killer would. He went as far as bragging about his choking ability and explained the cold-blooded efficiency of performing necrophilia on a victim's corpse instead of finding a new victim to rape and kill. It's kind of hard to believe that anybody would be able to do these things, but I mean, this is Love and Murder, so. While Gary Ridgway is not as well known as some other serial killers like Ted Bundy, he actually took far more victims than Bundy ever did. In fact, authorities were actively seeking Ted Bundy's help in capturing Gary by the time Ted Bundy had already been captured himself. This brings us to a plot straight out of a thriller novel. Investigators used Bundy's inside knowledge of being a serial killer himself and his familiarity with Washington state to help them form a profile. It's a disturbing but fascinating tale of how one serial killer helped catch another. In short, this is the gruesome, true story of Seattle serial killer Gary Ridgway. But first, I wanted to remind you to head on over to our exclusive group at patreon.com/love and murder. Our last bonus episode was the case of Charles Starkweather, a horrific serial killer who actually inspired some of Stephen King's writings. I also have a bonus of a cop interrogating a victim while they're dying instead of getting them some help. A victim. It is crazy. In this week's bonus, I go over Gary Ridgway's confession. So you don't want to miss all of this? We'll talk more about the Patreon at the end of this episode. Now, on to the show. Born on February 18, 1949, Gary Ridgway located to King County, Washington with his family at the age of 11. He was the second child of Mary and Thomas Ridgway, growing up with two brothers. Unfortunately, his early life was just a bunch of troubles at home, with his parents often engaging in violent arguments, fighting, just horrible home. Relatives also shared that his mother was quite domineering. As a child, Gary had a bedwetting problem that lasted until he was 13. And get this, his mother would wash his genitals after each episode. I mean, WTF. Until he was 13, he couldn't wash his own junk? Oh my God. This, coupled with dyslexia, made for a challenging childhood. Because, he was probably getting bullied in school. It's hard to do. He might have thought he was like stupid because they didn't understand dyslexia back then. Nobody was probably helping him. Nobody was paying attention to him at home. So he had a really challenging childhood. Gary had to repeat 2 grades in school before finally graduating from Tyee High School in 1969. In that same year, when he was 20, he joined the United States Navy for 2 years and was sent to Vietnam to serve on a supply ship where he saw combat. The year following, having already been acquainted with and courted his future wife for multiple years, Gary married her. Serving in the Navy, he spent a stint in the Philippines where he admits to utilizing the services of sex workers. Despite being angered by getting gonorrhea from having sex with these workers, he continued his activities unprotected. So basically, he got mad at prostitutes for giving him the gift that keeps on giving. And through his anger, he was like, well, things happen. But I'm going to keep being angry, but I'm going to keep doing this too. What? In July of 1971, he was respectfully discharged from the Navy, as well as a good homecoming to King County. While Gary was in the Philippines, his wife, let's say it like this, engaged in a romantic relationship with another guy. After he returned, she wanted to get separated, which he was like, all right. And on January 14, 1972, they got a separation. Gary then alleged that his wife had developed a prostitution ring, or I guess she started being a prostitute herself while he was gone. Gary then went about his life and joined the Kenworth Motor Truck Company as a painter in August of 1971. In 1972, he met his second wife, and after a year, they exchanged their wedding vows. So literally right after separation was granted. Or maybe they got separated in January and then got a divorce after that. I don't know. Either way, the same year he got a divorce, he got married again. On September 5th, 1975, him and his second wife had a son. Marcia, his second wife, complained of physical abuse from Gary. Interestingly enough, Gary became religious during his second marriage, frequently crying after sermons and reading aloud the Bible at work and at home, but he still continued to solicit sex workers. I don't understand his fascination with sex workers when he had women at home. Maybe sex addiction, you think? She also said that Gary loved doing bondage and having sex outside. She said that usually Gary wouldn't be home in the evenings and would come home wet and dirty whenever he did come home. Later on in their marriage, she said that he started coming home at increasingly later hours without providing her a reasonable explanation, like, I was out, I'm home now, what's your problem, I'm here now. Furthermore, while taking a walk with her in the woods, she would see him let me put it this way. She realized that he liked hiding from her while they were taking their hikes in the woods and then just suddenly jumping out and scaring her. So basically, he seemed like he kept practicing being able to stealthily walk around without her knowing where he was. And that was just really fun for him, which nothing's wrong with that. I mean, as a kid, I guess nothing's wrong with that. As an adult, it's like, okay. Later on, Gary actually admitted to having choked his second wife at least once using, the chokehold with your forearm and upper arm around the person's head and neck. As a result, and of course, their relationship went downhill. Eventually, I'm not laughing that that he did that. I'm just laughing that, of course, their relationship went downhill. Can you imagine? Anyway, eventually, they separated in July of 1980, and their divorce was finalized in May 27th of 1981. Their son went to live with Marcia, and he would visit Gary on, every other weekend. Additionally, Gary had a love-hate relationship with sex workers, often complaining about their presence in his neighborhood, but, still taking advantage of their services. I mean, if they're there, right? Well, I guess that answered my previous question, though, what was it with him and sex workers? Later, he would claim to hate prostitutes and that he didn't want to pay for sex. Now, my question is, do you think this has to do with anything dealing with mother issues, being that his mom cleaned his junk till he was 13? I don't know, but I really think he did have a sex addiction. Because if you talk to any of his ex-wives, they said that he demanded sex several times a day. And like I said, I guess this is why he was going to prostitutes and stuff, because maybe people couldn't satisfy him. like as many times as he wanted sex. I don't know. This is just me speculating, you guys. However, down to the facts, Gary would later tell a psychologist that he struggled with an intense sexual attraction towards his own mother, which made him want to kill her. Ew. And that's her fault. Some experts would suggest that this could have been a part of a larger pattern of inappropriate behavior on his mother's part. So basically, we only know that this one little thing, but maybe more stuff happened that he just didn't talk about, or maybe he even blocked out and he can't remember. But, he felt like this, but he never did end up killing his mother. But like I said, this is a case of a serial killer, and some people believe that the killing spree was basically an unconscious act of, quote, displaced matricide. So basically, he felt like he was killing his mom over and over and again, Gary engaged in many relationships with various women over the course of several years, finding many of them through a group called Parents Without Partners, which is a group for single parents. One woman really caught his eye, and they dated, and he proposed to her. She accepted and looked forward to getting married in the summer of 1984. However, the woman ended things with Gary when she found somebody else. Like, basically, she just found somebody else. She wanted to be with somebody else, and she was like, I can't marry you. And so in February of the following year, Gary met his third wife, whose name was Judith Mawson. In June of 1988, they got married, and she moved into his house a couple months. Well, I guess I'm saying this backwards. She moved into his house a couple months before they got married, and then they got married in June of 1988. After she moved into his house, she noticed that there was no carpet on the floor, which isn't weird unless it's like, how you pull up the carpet and there's just like untreated floor there? That's the only time that would be weird. But there's a reason that I'm mentioning this, so write this down in your little lamb notebook, and we'll get back to that fact later. In the 80s and 90s, a serial killer terrorized Seattle and Tacoma, Washington. The killer targeted teenage girls and women, mostly sex workers and runaways, who he picked up along Pacific Highway South. The killer's modus operandi, I think that's how you said it, modus operandi was brutal. He would deceive the women into trust in him by showing them pictures of his son. After engaging in sexual activities, he would strangle them from behind, often with a forearm around their necks. So is this sounding familiar to you guys? He killed most of his victims in his home or truck, and he would dump their bodies in wooded areas around the Green River, Seattle, Tacoma International Airport, and other dump sites within South King County. Some of the victims' remains were discovered in clusters, sometimes posed, usually nude. Because of these murders, the King County Sheriff's Office formed the Green River Task Force to investigate it. The task force included members like Robert Keppel, Dave Reichert, and FBI Special Agent John E. Douglas. Ted Bundy, who was in jail at this time, offered his opinions on the motivations and behavior of the killer. He suggested that the killer was revisiting the dump site to have sex with his victims. So basically, officers in the task force went to Ted Bundy, and because he was a serial killer, and I guess it was kind of like the same way, I don't want to say the same way. Basically, the thing they had in common is they were serial killers. So they figured they would go to a serial killer who was highly intelligent and get him to form a profile of this killer. So that's what they went to Ted Bundy for. It's not like he was just like, hey, I'm here, I'll help. They actually searched out his help. And he probably thought he wasn't doing anything anyway. So, it was something to do. So he helped. During the year 1983, Gary got the task force's attention due to the disappearance of Marie Malvar. The Des Moines Police Department conducted an initial investigation into the case. Subsequently, a man told them that he had seen Marie Malvar on the same night she had vanished, traveling in a truck that matched the one owned by Gary. The driver and the vehicle descriptions provided by the man were pretty vague, so it didn't really lead to much evidence to be able to actually arrest Gary. And as a result, even though they were really trying really hard to investigate this, the case came to a screeching halt. Gary's name then came up several more times as a potential Green River suspect. Throughout the 80s, the detectives from the task force examined him and questioned him quite a few times. And he went along with it. He went in, they called him in, he went down to the station, they called him up, he talked to them on the phone, he answered all their questions. He once told them that he, quote, dated sex workers, and at least one of them was one of the missing victims. One time he even admitted to assaulting Rebecca Gard, I don't know how to say the last name, Rebecca Gard-Guay, Guay, who was a sex worker herself. He said that he did it because she bit him, so, he felt like he had to defend himself. However, he was arrested multiple times between 1982 and 2001, once for charges related to prostitution. So they were really trying to get him. They were really trying to bring him in. He was just a really, really strong suspect, but they never had enough to let it stick. So they just kept arresting him, but they kept having to let him go. Within the span of 1 month in the summer of 1982, 5 women were found murdered in or around the Green River area. The first victim was Wendy Caulfield, and Gary had already faced multiple accusations of killing the 3 most recent victims, who was Opal Mills, Cynthia Hines, and Marcia Chapman. Police noticed that the murderer who took the lives of the 4 aforementioned women had to be, without a doubt, unequivocally the same person who ended Deborah Bonner's life as well, which her body had surfaced in the Green River just weeks before Wendy Caulfield's remains were discovered. Not before, after. I apologize. Weeks after Wendy Caulfield's remains were discovered, but right before they had found Opal, Cynthia, and Marcia. In 1984, police gave Gary a polygraph test with questions focused on the murders. He denied killing anyone and passed the test with flying colors. This is what I'm saying. That's why you really can't go by these polygraph tests. For instance, if he didn't believe this was murder or killing or whatever word or feeling he put in his head about what he did to them, then that could actually help him pass in the polygraph. So basically, whatever he believed, if you said something different, hey, did you murder Opal Mills, for instance? And he said, no, I didn't murder them, because in his head, he gave them peace or something like that. And this is literally what he believed. And he didn't believe he murdered. Then he could pass the polygraph test. What do y'all think? Do y'all think that's a long shot in my way of thinking? But this is how I'm thinking some people could pass the polygraph test. Basically, this is their reality, and what you're saying isn't part of their reality. You know what I'm saying? Is it confusing, or do y'all understand? On April 8th, 1987, the task force served a search warrant on Gary's residence, his work locker, and several vehicles. Investigators confiscated carpet fibers, rope, paint samples, and plastic tarps as hundreds of pieces of evidence. They were later taken to the Washington State Police Crime Laboratory, where they were cross-referenced with evidence discovered at the crime scenes. The detectives meticulously scoured Gary's financial records, but no proof was found indicating his involvement at a specific crime or with a specific victim. However, finally, a critical piece of evidence was obtained during the warrant execution, which was Gary's saliva sample. So 1987. Over a decade later, and Detective Tom Jensen sent biological evidence from multiple victims to WSPCL for DNA typing, which was analyzed by forensic scientist Beverly Himmick in September of 2001. Himmick also specifically examined vaginal swabs from Marcia Chapman. The swab revealed a male DNA profile which partially matched Gary's genetic profile, according to her final findings. They also examined pubic hairs from Opal males and confirmed a male DNA profile that was consistent with Gary's as well. Another forensic scientist analyzed the vaginal swabbings obtained from Carol Christensen. The DNA extracted from the sperm fraction found on the vaginal swab matched with Gary's DNA. So basically, after all of this, it left little doubt to who was doing all of this. The probability of finding the same DNA in another human being was literally 0. You know how they say like 0.11111%, but they literally said 0. Unless he had an identical twin, which, did his mom hide his twin somewhere? So all of this evidence linked Gary to a singular location, multiple victims, and the King County Sheriff's Office started making arrangements to, arrest him because now they had solid proof. So at this point, another task force was assembled, and this one was comprised of a team of multiple agencies, and they again called themselves the Task Force. I don't know if I would have changed that name. The Ultimate Task Force. Avengers Assemble. I don't know, something. This new task force was formed by the police to assemble cases against Gary and to examine the other murders that remained unsolved. On November 16, 2001, Gary tried to solicit a prostitute, so, his MO, who was actually an undercover King County officer. He questioned her if she was dating. That's so weird. And she said, I'm yours tonight, sugar. And he was like, all right, meet me further on down the street. So, of course, they exchanged the money or whatever they needed to do in order to arrest him. And they arrested him and took him down to the King County jail. And Gary said, hey, please don't tell my wife. And instead said, just don't call my wife, but instead of calling her, call the Green River Task Force because they know me really well. What? Oh my God, what? So, they contacted everybody. Everybody's coming together, the Green River Task Force and the Task Force. And Gary was still, confident in what he was saying. No, I didn't kill anybody. No, I didn't do this and this and this. And despite that, 2 weeks later, on November 30th, 2001, he was arrested for murder. Now, the weird thing is he was arrested for murder leaving his job. So I guess they had arrested him for the prostitution. And when they met with the two task force met and talked it out, whatever, they let him go while they were doing that, which I don't know why you would do that. And then they ultimately arrested him when he was leaving work. That's just a roundabout way they already had him. They should have just kept him. But I guess maybe you could only keep people for a certain length of time. I don't know. That's weird. On December 5th, 2001, the King County prosecuting attorney accused Gary of 4 counts of aggravated murder in the first degree involving the death of Carol Christensen, Cynthia Hines, Marsha Chapman, and Opal Mills. And that DNA evidence actually connected Gary to 3 out of the 4 victims in the accusations. But it was still evidence that the same person who had killed these people had killed Cynthia, as she was found near 2 of the other victims. And on April 15th, 2002, the King County prosecuting attorney had given written notice that they would seek the death penalty in this case. Detectives and prosecutors analyzed uncharged instances. Basically, they hadn't charged Gary on certain murders that they thought were, fit his MO. But they wanted to send these murders out for more research so that they can have a possibility of potentially charging him more, This research was composed of hundreds of witnesses, interviews, and any physical evidence that would be sent to the state-of-the-art forensic examination. So it's now 2002, not 2020, 2002. So, of course, there have been advancements in forensic examinations. Technology for forensic examination. However, even though there was an extensive review of all the physical evidence by so many different labs from around the country, Nothing new came to light, and there was like nothing substantial that they could use. But the court didn't want to wait. He's been doing this since the 80s. They didn't want to wait anymore. So King County Superior Court mandated a charging deadline of March 28, 2003. So basically, get your ducks in a row because this is the deadline. In the meantime, investigators are still trying to send out evidence and, DNA and all this stuff to both public and private forensic labs. They just want anybody to help them with anything. Microtrace, a private lab, discovered minute paint shavings on Wendy Caulfield and Deborah Estes' clothes, like literally right before that deadline approached. The paint shavings that they found appeared to be exclusive DuPont Imron paint that was being used at the Kenworth truck factory, where guess who was working? So that was something huge. And of course, that was like the nail in the coffin. So Gary was accused of committing 7 counts of aggravated first-degree murder. However, that's only a portion of the Green River killings that they could actually put on him. Upon his arraignments, his lawyers approached the King County prosecuting attorney and proposed that they drop the pursuit of the death penalty in exchange for Gary confessing to the charges and also admitting to several other cases. To avoid the death penalty, basically, he would admit to the guilt of 7 counts that he was charged with, and additionally, 40 to 47 counts of murder. So that was the deal. But for him to do that, you have to waive the death penalty. And on paper, what they wrote down was that Gary would provide a complete and truthful account of all of his criminal activities in King County and show investigators the location of victims that they have not yet found. Now, the options that they had was that this offer could be declined by the prosecutor so that they can actually just go to trial and be charged with 7 counts of murder, and the verdict would be up to the jury. And then they would also have to decide if he would face the death penalty or not. And then even if the jury said, yeah, death, with all other legal proceedings that could happen between that, there was a strong possibility that Gary might die from natural causes in prison before he would even face execution. Or they could take the deal and he wouldn't have to go to trial and everything like that. And, they would at least know what happened to other victims. And this would actually, put an end to the community's nightmare. The parents, the victim's family would know what happened. People wouldn't be, so quick to lock their doors, which they still should lock their doors. But, it would just be a means to an end, sorry. So on June 13th, 2003, Gary and the King County prosecuting attorney reached an agreement. To avoid the possibility of execution, he said he would reveal truthful information about his crimes. He agreed to answer all questions posed by the police or the prosecutor's office and show complete candor during his interviews. He also pledged to disclose the exact location of any undiscovered physical remains of his victims. What do y'all think about that? So with everything that I said, not only would it help the community and the victim family, it would actually also help the police to look into unsolved murder cases that were not linked to Gary so they could identify other possible suspects. And also, if Gary was found to be withholding information, he could potentially be sentenced to death for any murders he had failed to reveal. So, on November 5th, 2003, Gary pled guilty to 48 charges of aggravated first-degree murder. He helped the police locate the remains of his victims and provided other details in the investigation. While he was giving his guilty plea statement, Gary said that he had done all his murders in King County and then had moved the bodies and dumped them near Portland, Oregon just to throw the cops off. Also, what Ted Bundy had said years earlier was spot on. Gary would occasionally return to the dump sites to have sexual intercourse with the deceased. He said that he did not find necrophilia to be more sexually satisfying, but having sex with the dead helped him reduce his need to obtain a living victim and basically limited his exposure to being caught. Not that he felt guilty in, having to go get a living person to kill them or whatever, to have sex with them and then kill them, but he just didn't want to get caught. That was it. And also necrophilia, ew. Remember when Judith said that when she moved in, Gary didn't have a carpet? Detectives later told her that he had probably wrapped a body in the carpet. And Judith speculated that he must have committed some of the murders while supposedly working early morning shifts. So, remember he used to come home wet and dirty and all that stuff? So, she claimed that she had not suspected Gary's crimes before she was contacted by authorities in 1987 and had not even heard of the Green River Killer before that time because she didn't watch the news. So, I can understand it. If you're not really even suspecting the person in your house, even if she did watch the news and she just didn't suspect the person she was with, I could understand. Despite his crimes, Gary actually said that marrying Judith led to a reduction in his body count. He claimed that while he was in a relationship with his third wife, he genuinely loved her and his kill rate dropped. Of his 49 known victims, only 3 were killed after he married Judith. So I guess that was accurate. Later, while being interviewed with a local television station, Judith said that she believed she saved lives by being his wife and making him happy. If you want more details in what he confessed, you can join our exclusive Lamb group at www.patreon.com/love and murder at the $5 tier or above, and I'll be reading it out in its entirety over there, like his entire confession. In December of 2003, Gary was sentenced to 48 life sentences without the possibility of parole by the King County Superior Court Judge Richard Jones. The life sentences were to be served consecutively, meaning there was no, absolutely none, zero, zilch, no chance of release. On top of this, Gary was given an additional 10 years for having tampering with evidence relating to each of the 48 victims, adding a further 480 years to his already crazy sentence. Later in that same year, Gary was given his 49th life sentence after the discovery of the remains of his final victim. In January of 2004, Gary was placed in solitary confinement at Washington State Penitentiary in Walla Walla. The remains of 2 other victims, Marie Malvar and April Buttram, were later found. Then, in 2005, hikers came across disturbing items on their trail, which led to 2 further life sentences for Gary. Although Gary confessed to being responsible for 48 murders, he eventually admitted to actually killing 71 women. He discussed details of the crime, revealing his hatreds of prostitutes, like I said before, and video recordings of his confessions were completed and released, including one where he claimed that murdering young women was his, quote, career. He also said that, quote, I killed so many women, I have a hard time keeping them straight. End quote. Wow. In 2010, another set of hikers, discovered the skull of yet another victim, Rebecca Marrero, who was last seen leaving a motel in 1982. And in 2011, Gary said, yeah, I killed her too, so he pled guilty to her too. So he was already serving consecutive life sentences, and literally, they were like, all right, they didn't even add it on to his sentence. On May 14th, 2015, he was transferred to USP Florence High, a high-security federal prison located east of Canyon City, Colorado. However, the public did not like this transfer. They were not happy about it. And They went to Governor Jay Inslee and complained, and Corrections Secretary Bernie Warner basically later on announced that Gary would be transferred back to Washington so he could be, quote, easily accessible for other open murder investigations. And so on October 24th, 2015, they transferred him back by plane to the very same prison that he was initially isolated in. So in this case, you could tell that authorities were taking these murders seriously because they went to great lengths to catch their guy. They moved back and forth across state lines. They kept trying to find reasons to arrest Gary because they just knew it was him. Like, it couldn't have been like anybody else, even though there wasn't any hard evidence, but they just kept trying. And you can see throughout the years, they just kept trying. And although he's murdered at least, because that's just at least. So at first he said 49, then he said 71. So who knows if that was all, because he was trying to kill as many prostitutes as he could. I didn't say that in the story, but he did say that. So even though he's murdered at least 71 women, and he literally has no remorse for it, he is not really talked about that much, but he is one of the most prolific serial killers in United States history. And that is the case of serial killer Gary Ridgway. So Lambs, what did you think about this case? Please let me know in the comments below, or head on over to www.murderandlove.com and shoot me an SOS. And I also wanted to come on here and just leave a quick note, just a one-on-one with y'all. I wanted to apologize to y'all for the episodes coming out on different days and not just, constantly on the same day like I used to and like it should be. I just want to ask you to be patient with me as I transition through different things that's going on in my life. First of all, I had a co-host, then I didn't have a co-host, then I had a co-host, then I didn't have a co-host, and just some other stuff that's going on in my life. So episodes will still be coming out weekly. I am desperately trying to get back on a schedule where I can say episodes come out every Sundays at 6 or something like that. But please be patient with me. They will come out weekly. It just won't be on the same days until I get everything together. And I want to thank you, each and every one of you, whether you like my show or not, for your dedication and support throughout these 3 years. And like I said in the beginning of the episode, I was going to tell you about our Patreon. So visit us on Patreon, www.patreon.com/love and murder to become an exclusive member of the Lamb community. You get commercial-free, full-length, early release episodes of Love and Murder, as well as some extras of whatever case we're covering. So if the case, you'll get all the pictures, you'll get the evidence, if there's videos to it, you'll get that. You get all the extras of whatever case we're covering over in our Lamb community. You also get bonus content like Charles Starkweather. You get to see the video that I was telling you about earlier. And also the bonus that I'm doing is I'll be basically reading out Gary's confession from this case over in our Patreon. So other bonus content you get is bonus episodes like Love Obsessions, Crazy Crime, Serial Killer Corner. You get some monthly bonus with me and Shar, so you still get to see Shar, behind the scenes, and so much more. We have options starting at only $1 a month, but your best bet is to do the $5 and above tier. So come on over. www.patreon.com/love and murder. You can find all our social media links in the show notes below. And as we always end each episode, I just want to remind you that it's, say it with me now, all love and no murder, y'all. Bye.